before we get started, thank our sponsors again. Again, if it wasn't for their contribution, we would not be able to have kept this event free for everybody. So props to those folks. Check them out if you can. There's some good companies out there that are great for us. So props. All right, want to pitch it to Lauren Easter, who is at Missouri State University, and Casey Davison, also at Missouri State University. So I will be posting the session evaluation at the end of the presentation. Please hold your questions until then unless prompted. And again, you can put some stuff in the chat and we'll go from there. So I will turn it over to you guys.
So Matt kind of made a small joke about Casey and I both being from Missouri State University, as that is what our presentation is about, is same ladder, next rung. Casey and I both have been at Missouri State for quite some time. So that leads us into what we're going to talk about today, with being internal candidates for various positions. So today we're going to learn about the advantages and disadvantages of hiring an internal candidate, as well as applying as an internal candidate, the challenges that you may face during and after the hiring process, and balancing what you know works within a department and what you want to do that's new while after you've been hired. So I'll kick it over to Casey to do his intro.
Yeah, so as mentioned, I'm Davison. I'm a graduate assistant in rec sports at Missouri State. I also did my undergraduate here. Higher. It's been 6 years of development, and I started as a freshman. I feel like a lot of people started as an official in kind of the rec sports world, worked way up to supervisor, did some student coordinating stuff, so kind of like GA work, but as an undergrad. And then I've now found myself in my current situation where I'm a graduate assistant. There's another graduate assistant in rec sports, but we currently do not have a professional staff over us. It's Lauren at the associate. So there's kind of a gap there. So with that, it's been a lot of experience that I've already had being put into place as kind of being the pseudo professional staff between me and the other graduate assistant. So it's a good situation. I was glad to step up into the role. And we'll kind of get into kind of what I've kind of gone through in the 3 or 4 months that I've been in this position.
Awesome. And I am Lauren Easter, the Associate Director of Campus Recreation. I was the Assistant Director of Rec Sports at Missouri State before applying for this position. And that has been my only internal experience with this. But I'll tell you, it's very different applying internally than it is externally. I've worked at 4 different universities, and the internal process, I think, was the hardest. You know all these people and what they do. And so going from Oklahoma State as an official, as an undergrad, to Ball State as a graduate, I got my first job at the University of Delaware, and then came over to Missouri State as an assistant director. And all of those processes were hard and difficult. And I was applying for, several positions at the time, from, graduate, applying for all kinds of assistant jobs, all kinds of coordinator jobs. And then, of course, wanting to move back towards home and get out of the East Coast where they take all your money for rent, and moving back to the Midwest. And so it was difficult whenever you're looking at an internal process. It may be the only one that you're applying for, and you don't know other people that are doing it. So those are just some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So Matt thanked our sponsors before, but I wanted to go ahead and include who those sponsors are today, as they've made this conference super easy for us, not having a fee associated with that. So that's been really awesome. So thanks to everybody that helped out today.
So a good start to kind of work through this is just bare bones looking at the advantages and disadvantages for myself personally as an internal hire. So some of the advantage was there's little to no training. I already knew how to work Rec Portal, Fusion IM, which most of everyone uses IM League. So that would have been a huge transition to have to train someone who had IM Leagues coming in and doing Fusion IM. I did have those established connections with the staff. I knew everyone, and I still know everyone because I've been a part of all the hirings. So that's been a huge advantage for me, was being able to do that. And then I also know the strengths and challenges of this department. I know what we do well, what we do poorly, where we need improvement. I knew all of that coming in. So as we'll get to later, it kind of set a higher bar for myself. The disadvantages, it might not feel like a full promotion. Since I was kind of doing some of that graduate assistant work, it just kind of changed from doing that work to helping others do that work. So it kind of took over more of a mentor role, but it wasn't like a full-blown out new set of responsibilities. Another disadvantage is I only have the experience that I've gained here at Missouri State. So I really had to try to maximize that experience and knowledge that I've gotten and try to use it, also look at other universities, what they're doing, so I can get that experience while still being here. And the transition can be difficult. We'll get to later with relationships and all that, but there's potentially this feel that you're just still one of the supervisors, one of the student coordinators. You're not a graduate assistant. You haven't really matured. Even though you have a title, you're still the same person. So kind of working through that and establishing yourself in the position that you got.
And I wanted to mention, Matt mentioned if you guys have questions, hold them till the end. But if anybody has any comments or questions throughout this, they can certainly unmute. We have a small group today, so that it makes it pretty easy to be able to converse a little more. So we'll move forward. So we at Missouri State have had quite a range of external to internal candidates. We've had our graduate assistant of Casey being internal. We have a current assistant director that was hired internal, myself, and our director also internal. And so we've been through the motions of doing this, and it's been a great experience for everyone, and it shows that the people that we hire have the skills that we want them to have. So that's why we're bringing up an assistant director process as well. So to start that, the advantages of a internal candidate being an assistant director is that they get to potentially take on a new skill set. This was something that was offered by one of our current employees that said they got to go from one area specific to a different functional areas that was specific. And that's something that you may not get at an external university, that if you're in rec sports, you may have to stay in rec sports. That's where all your experiences are. But internally, a lot of people get that opportunity to go from facilities to aquatics or aquatics to rec sports. You know the person that you're getting. So hiring somebody who was a graduate assistant at your university, you know the skills that that person brings, you know their strengths or weaknesses. And that's sometimes a great thing. Sometimes it's an advantage, sometimes it's a disadvantage. And then additionally, that person usually has strong relationships with the student staff, which is great. And also, we'll talk about later that it could be hard to transition out of. So some disadvantages with that is they potentially lack some leadership experience. It's always great to hire somebody that has several years of professional experience, but we have all been in that situation or are in that situation where you're coming out of a graduate assistant position or you're looking at only graduate assistants. And so sometimes those people lack that experience. And then, like Casey mentioned, he probably doesn't have as much outside programming experience as we want him to. So having them take that extra step to research, to talk to their colleagues, and bring those new ideas back to the university. And then, as always, it's trouble transitioning, going from being in that buddy-buddy situation as a graduate assistant to being that person who is in a more established leadership role. And then our next slide is about associate director, but I think most of these are applicable to any exec position in an organization. So some of the advantages to this are knowing the dynamics of the team. So I myself have worked at Missouri State for going on 6 years. So whenever I became associate director, I knew who I was going to be supervising. That was going to be so cool, but also that could be difficult. So knowing the dynamics of the team is an advantage, and that it was something I could plan for. Establish relationships in the department and on campus, being able to manage an emotional bank account with people that you've already had that established time together. You've already had those favors in the bank, and be able to retract some of those if needed. And then, of course, little to no training. I stepped into my position, and there were a few things I needed to know about that were administrative. But as far as managing each area, I had a pretty good knowledge base. Just because I'd been here for so long, I know how things work. And instead of coming into a new community, a new culture, it was easy breezy. So some disadvantages. I mentioned this, an advantage of established relationships in the department and on campus. So there are some people who I'm pretty sure they like me. And there are some people I'm pretty sure they don't like me. And so that's been kind of hard to navigate with, okay, well, I'm in a new role, so I need to get along with that person a little better. And it's more important to my job that I do that. And then, of course, I'm going to be coming up on this disadvantage of it's going to be difficult letting go of rec sports once we hire an assistant director to fill that position. That's been my responsibility for the past 5 years and going on 6. So being able to have somebody new take that over is going to be hard to do. And then difficulty getting others to see you as a supervisor. There are some people that I've worked side by side with for 6 years, and that it's been kind of a struggle from time to time for them to come to me as their supervisor and not our director. And so being able to make sure that those people know the new hierarchy and not trying to be, I'm the boss, but I'm the boss, has been hard.
So now looking at hiring internally from the organization standpoint, some of the advantages, onboarding made simple. We've talked about little to no training. That's always a good advantage as far as the training side goes. Familiar with the current vision and mission. That was a huge thing that I kind of saw in our GA trainings, where myself and the other rec sports GA are internal hires. And we were able to kind of like lead everyone to know like this is what we're all about here at Missouri State and kind of get everyone up to speed. As well as the strengths are known. So as an organization, you know what you're going to get out of the candidate. You know what they are good at, but also disadvantages, we know what they're bad at. So how can we work with those weaknesses that they may have as a candidate and add them to our team where we can cover those weaknesses through the team setting? Other disadvantages, expectations are going to be higher. I know for me personally, they're higher. I'm not taking the first semester as a GA to learn my job. I know that the rec wants me here to kind of take over, help train our officials, train our staff, and try to take on that higher level of responsibility. There is also some unease about maybe there was some favoritism with the hiring. I know personally with Lauren, whenever we did our student interviews for the associate job, it was much easier to talk to Lauren in our interviews than it was the other candidates because we all knew her and she's a pretty likable person most of the times. But there could have been some favoritism perceived there and not have been she was more qualified for the job than the other candidates. So those are just kind of the viewpoint from the organization. So then also the process from the candidate standpoint. So this is during the interview as a candidate. What are some things that kind of go on? Well, during the process, all the information is confidential. Very kind of awkward situation to be in. For me personally, it meant that during our supervisor meetings, I had to leave and go stand outside the door and wait for like 5 minutes and then wait to be brought back in. It was kind of a weird situation to be in. And there has been some awkward instances. I think, Lauren, you have a great story about this. If you'd like to tell.
Most people I think on this call know me pretty well, and one of my things that you might not know about me is that I love the hiring process to be as consistent as possible and as professional as possible, especially when we are talking about our future professionals or our future students going out into the workforce, that they need to have that experience. And so I was really excited for Casey to come on board as our graduate assistant. And in our student supervisor meeting, I announced that he got the job and blew everyone out of the water. And that's what I said in front of another candidate that also interviewed for the graduate assistant position. And it didn't occur to me at all until somebody actually mentioned it after the meeting. I think it was Casey came to me and was like, hey, so this guy was also in there. Remember he applied? And so it was pretty awkward to then face him afterwards. And so that has been a learning lesson for sure. And I didn't handle it much better this last time, but I did make sure I told somebody that ahead of time that they were in a certain situation. So those situations can be very awkward.
And then just some other things with internal candidates is just making sure that they still do their job. That's kind of a big thing, is whether or not they feel like they got it. They might lose motivation, which go to the next one, staying motivated if they don't get it. Those two kind of play together, where there's this, we all know how long the hiring process can take. It could be, months, and there's weeks of silence where you just don't know anything. So staying motivated with your job and making sure that the candidate can still do their job and feels comfortable being at work. After the process, there is that waiting period. So I know I had my phone interview, and there was just this 2 weeks time of, I just went along with my time. I had my internship going for school. I had all of my shifts that I had to still cover, still working. Everyone just kind of like giving me weird looks. No one really talked to me about it. So there was just that waiting period that was kind of strange. And then moving forward with a potential new boss, I'm currently facing this where I had thrown my hat in the ring as well for the assistant director of rec sports. I wasn't chosen to move forward, but just kind of looking forward to the new boss coming in and how I can work with them and kind of get them set up for success. And then just setting expectations that are realistic. With the assistant director job, I knew the expectations that I had. I stayed realistic, where I didn't expect to really get a phone interview. When I got that, I was very happy. But beyond that, I didn't expect to get beyond campus stuff. So just having those expectations as a candidate, and knowing where you sit and just being real with yourself. And even if that is kind of talking with someone who may not be on the search committee, but is within the department. That's what I had to do with Lauren after I found out that I didn't move on, was I had to have a conversation with kind of where I was at, because while I did have real expectations, it was kind of a bummer. But just kind of having that go-to person to talk about that stuff, where they can kind of keep you grounded, and that way you don't have your head up in the sky. But yeah, that's kind of that portion.
I will add a couple of things to this about the waiting period. I was really fortunate with my waiting period. I interviewed for the job, I think at 38 weeks pregnant. So I interviewed, and then I didn't think about it again until Ashley called me and offered me the chance of a lifetime. So that was really great for me to be fortunate enough to not have to be in that awkward, moving around the department, nobody talking to me, period. But I will say that our assistant director that has been hired internally, he found out because he was in my car, and my husband called me on speakerphone and asked if I told him yet. And so it's really tough. And that kind of goes into our next slide about information sharing and storing, and encouraging those closed door conversations. When we have an internal candidate, we have to ensure that all evaluations, interview questions, when interviews are set to private or in a private storage. And so it makes it a little difficult to talk about just randomly about, what do you think about this person? It needs to be in someone's office, and it needs to be private. And then of course, keeping consistency. This was something that we experienced as a department. I think it's a really very cool thing that we've had so many internal candidates. We had a graduate assistant who applied for an assistant director job with 2 external candidates, and we did the external candidates first. And at one of the interviews, we would go around and introduce ourselves and what we did, and it was laid back and nonchalant. We got to this internal candidate, and we went straight into questioning, and it was essentially as if we were really grilling him rather than trying to get to know him, which is what the interview is for. And so keeping things consistent and having that privacy during the process is really important. And then of course, like Casey mentioned, staying motivated, keeping potentially Casey motivated through this process and encouraging him about the goods and the bads and how to work through those is important. Myself included. Whenever this was happening, I was just thinking, who is it? Who are they going to be? They're going to be my boss. I don't know anything about them. And then, of course, keeping staff contained and not blabbing. I obviously was the problem on several of these occasions, unfortunately. But we have been able to maintain pretty good professionalism in most cases. And so that has been really good for after the process, because especially with professional staff, if you don't know if you're going into a professional staff position, that timeline extends months, from applying to your phone interview to an on-campus to knowing. That could be months apart. And so that makes it a little difficult to maintain.
So now this kind of balancing act after you've been hired. So from a graduate assistant standpoint, there are some things that I've talked about with Lauren where it was like, what are my responsibilities? Because I knew that I wasn't going to be treated as an external graduate assistant coming in. I knew that coming into it. So kind of the things that have happened so far this semester is I have this 5 years of knowledge of stuff that we've done and what is worth and what is not worth. So there is some bringing back of traditions and norms. With not having a professional staff, there have been a few things that have fallen through the cracks. So just trying to figure out how can we fill those gaps, and I know how we can do it. So kind of stepping in and kind of taking that responsibility on. Big things that our students love is our legacy cups for our sports. So our fraternity champion plays our Top Gun champion. We did that 2 weeks ago, and that had a great turnout. Everyone seemed to enjoy it. People didn't understand why we didn't have it, and the reason we didn't have it was we never had a pro staff. So kind of stepping up, having the responsibility and the authority or power to kind of make those choices and decisions was great. There's a lot of refining and not reinventing. So this goes with really any candidate, external or internal. You don't want to come in and wreck shop. You want to kind of have a period where you learn about the program, learn about the challenges, and then from there, start refining and reinventing. As an internal candidate, as a graduate assistant, my job is really just refining. I have been able to add a few things, but that was kind of COVID related, with individual sports, doing a tennis tournament, doing cornhole tournaments, things that were going to already happen potentially, but just helping that kind of happen, but really just refining. There's also higher expectations. We talked about that earlier. I'm expected to do basically what a second year GA would be doing. I don't have this transition period of learning my job. I already know what my job is because I helped out with the other graduate assistants and I am an internal hire. And then the biggest thing is just establishing yourself as a GA, going from working with your peers to then stepping up and being kind of their supervisor, their boss. That is kind of a difficult transition, especially with all the relationships that I had with them. They were all pretty good relationships. I never had anyone that I would consider at odds with, just maybe not as friendly or as known. So kind of establish myself as I am now your supervisor, but I also have these relationships. It is still going on that transition period, but that was really interesting to kind of go through.
And then talking about from an assistant director point of view, once you've made that transition and you have been hired, thinking about what to do with your culture, whether you're going to keep it or change it. And that's been something that we have seen many people do, where they'll come in and, the culture is we can lay around on the pads downstairs at the climbing wall. And then somebody new comes in and they're like, hey, no laying down on the pads and the climbing wall. And so changing it or keeping it is something that an internal candidate has to decide. And that is met with sometimes some harsh feedback. Sometimes it's met with an embrace, inheriting staff and hiring your own is something that everyone experiences. That sometimes when you come into a position, internal or external, you know people, or perhaps the kind of people, and you think to yourself, well, they're going to be gone in a couple of years. They're a senior or they're a junior. I'll just hire my own people. When you're an internal candidate, you already have those established relationships. And so being able to continuously develop those people that are juniors and seniors that you have a relationship with, that you've been around, is really important than potentially as an external candidate where you can just play the waiting game and not really get attached to those people. Next is setting new expectations. That when you're going from a graduate assistant to an assistant director, you have to set the expectations for those staff members, for the professional staff members to see you differently. And sometimes that takes a hard talk, or sometimes that's simply showing by example, but that's something that every internal candidate has to face. And then keeping the good, losing the bad. Everyone may not agree with you. This is something Casey hit on as his graduate assistant position, that it wasn't reinventing, it was refining. But if he did want to reinvent something that he thought should be better, then, how would the staff handle that? How would your culture handle that? How would your supervisor handle that? Those are all things that our assistant director, who we got this information from, went through, especially in his position where his supervisor did oversee that area as an assistant director as well. So they had that experience, and therefore perhaps thought that something was more applicable than what that person thought. Sorry, I'm trying to use, gender neutral. It's very difficult. Okay. So then moving into associate director, again, these are my own personal experiences of this is how it's always been. That's something every internal candidate faces. I know whenever we got our new director, the second phrase was said a lot, that things are better than they used to be. But, whenever you get into a new position, you still want to have standards, but they are met with old ways, perhaps. But you still want to find that way to challenge people and not come in guns a-blazing. And so I think this is something that has been really supported in my position as an internal person, that my director has been really great at knowing my strengths and weaknesses and telling me, hey, Lauren, pump the brakes a little bit, but also at times be like, you really do need to say something here. And so sometimes this is how it's always been, or things are better than they used to be. As an internal candidate, could be, it really takes you back a little bit, that you're like, okay, well, then maybe we don't need to change anything, or maybe I don't need to be doing that. But that's something that I've learned, that it's really not what these people think. Sometimes it's what I think sometimes.
So now just kind of going into the establishing or reestablishing of the culture. From a graduate assistant, this is kind of something that you may not have as much control over. In my current situation, with there not being professional staff immediately over me, me and the other graduate assistant have been able to take this on more than just a normal graduate assistant moving up internally with the supervisor. So whenever I stepped into this position, the employees that I supervised knew what to expect from me. They knew my leadership style, they knew my management style, they knew my organization that I like to have on programs, I like deadlines, I like to know that deadlines are set. I like to really pick into every little decision we make to make sure that we look at it from every area. So they knew what to expect when I became a graduate assistant from me. It really goes down to building the strong working relationships with the former supervisors that are now your peers. So the graduate assistants, they knew me as a student, but now stepping up as I'm one of you. So how can I work with those relationships? And that also goes up to our professional staff and admin staff. As a student, I was always wanting more responsibility and asking it of them. And a lot of times, if it was a no, the answer was, you don't have that kind of clearance or responsibility yet. But now, whenever I ask that and they say that, well, I'm a graduate assistant, I can know these things. So now it's sitting in on directors' meetings and helping out, giving my viewpoints and stuff that I couldn't have done before. But just making sure that they know that now the dynamic isn't professional student, but professional, that middle ground that a GA is between student and professional. So just working on those relationships, and then also just using my position to correct course. With there not being pro staff, I've been here when there was a pro staff. So knowing how to correct us, starting with the supervisor group and then working down to the officials. So there have been things that have fallen off that I've been trying to pull back on. We don't, for example, we don't give good enough evaluations to our officials. So working with that to make them better official, that's just something that kind of has fallen off in the past year and a half, which is not to fault Lauren because she's in charge of more departments than just ours. It's really just trying to help her out so that way she doesn't have to worry about rec sports as much as she does. And that's just kind of the culture aspect of coming in as a graduate assistant intern.
Yeah, that kind of reiterates a little bit about it's going to be hard to let go. I don't know if I will worry less about rec sports, but somebody's going to have to make me. All right, moving into establishing or reestablishing culture as an assistant director. I'm sure many of us have faced, if you haven't already, you have to have that boss mode established. As a graduate assistant, I'm sure Casey can attest to this, that if I were to, have to do some kind of discipline to somebody or talk to them about their work ethic, really he could be the one that they come back to and be like, can you believe Lauren? Oh my gosh. I would use other words that they probably say, but I won't in this presentation. So whenever you move from that position to your next position, you have to establish that, okay, this is my serious face. Okay, this is an email, so therefore it's serious. And that is sometimes really difficult to do whenever you move from position to position because people know you already. Hearing everyone out on what is good and what could change. One of the biggest mistakes I made when I got to Missouri State, I remember it very distinctly, and it really ruined my life for about 6 months with a specific student staff. But I came in the first night that there were rec sports happening, and everybody was signing a waiver every night. They had to put their initials every night that they played. And in my head, I was like, well, this is really silly. But I didn't say that in my head. I actually said it out loud to this employee. And that just was really not what you want to hear from your boss coming in. And so making sure that you hear everyone out and make changes slowly if you are going to make them, and ensuring that you get that group buy-in. Things could all be good, and going with what you think is best is what is most important. If you think the culture is good, if you think that your employees are doing well, you have the right employees, have confidence in yourself to keep that moving forward and keep refining rather than reinventing. But like I said, I just cannot give anybody better advice of not coming in like a tornado. I'm sure everybody has been in a position, or if you haven't yet, you may someday, where your boss you just don't mesh, you don't gel, you don't like what they do, you don't like their policy, how they handle things. And when you get into your next leadership position, you want to make different changes, but be patient. Learn from your employees first, and then come in with those new ideas, because once you get that group buy-in, it makes everything much smoother. And the person we got this information from can really attest to that. And then moving into the executive position of employees set their expectations of you very quickly, and ensuring that you meet them is very important. Since these people already know you and you're moving into be their supervisor, there's someone specific in my position that I supervise that it is very important to them that people are held accountable. And that was very important to me, that I met that expectation immediately, because I also wanted to hold people accountable, specifically people that I supervise and know. It's a weakness, I think, with some of the people I supervise. And so I wanted to meet that very quickly. And I did, and we've had a lot of conversations about it, and has really helped with our relationship. Not letting your expectation fall because things are fine. This was something that I was just recently on a chat about with a couple of people in our department, and it is something that we are striving to continuously improve our department. And as an internal candidate, it's easier to see those things because you're not having to learn a new culture, you're not having to learn a new community. So challenging your peers and challenging the people around you is much easier. However, sometimes that could be seen as annoying or pushy. And so being able to balance that and get people bought into what you're saying is what's most important. And most of the time, like I said, my supervisor really supports me. And then sometimes she really wants me to pump the brakes and calm down. Ensuring relationship between supervisor and you is defined. And even top down is also important to make sure that in most cases, people will go from a director being there for 20 years to then being their right hand or left hand person. And sometimes it's really awkward at first. And so I want to make sure I hit on that. In my specific situation, As my director grew, I grew, and as she grew, I grew again. And so that's been a really good relationship for us. But in most cases, sometimes you'll come into a position where that is not the case. And so making sure that you and your supervisor have a defined relationship, open door, maybe everything's through email, is very, very important. And then in my personal opinion of culture, it is continued effort to stay up to date with the day-to-day. This is not an associate director or director's responsibility. It is not. Once we get that assistant director of rec sports, releasing that responsibility is going to be key to the success of the program. But knowing who works at your front desk, knowing who your facility managers are is very important, that you need to have those relationships set in case you have something that comes into play where you need a favor. I'm a big person on favors, so I really try to bank in a lot of quality time where I can. My boss once told me my desk was at our front desk.
So looking at relationships before and after the hiring process, with the graduate assistant, it really just built credibility for me. I did have that boost of confidence, but also with my peers, they kind of knew that this is the field I wanted to go into, so they knew that I was passionate about it. But then they kind of know I'm like, okay, Casey knows his stuff. He got that position, that like he knows what he's doing. So that was a huge thing for me. And then also just kind of creating my own leadership style. So now that I have this, authority, how do I go about using it? How do I get our staff to all get on the same wavelength and kind of go in the right direction? So that's kind of the biggest things that happened before and after this whole like hiring process as an incredible.
Oh, me. I will say when we were in Casey's interview process, the people who were in charge of finding that position mentioned that he had more experience than any of them in the room. And it was funny because one of our graduate assistants was in there. So it made it a pretty easy pick for us. Good job, Casey. You did great. So moving into relationships for an assistant director, as I mentioned, those people go from graduate assistant to assistant director. And so having that buddy dynamic is good and bad, that you'll have those established relationships with those students, those other graduate assistants specifically. But being able to transition those into that defined role as their boss is difficult, but it's definitely easy enough to do if you are able to have somebody mentor you through that. Earning the respect of the current professional staff is super critical. I believe that a lot of the people that have come to work at Missouri State have been successful in this, whether they've been students into graduate assistants or graduate assistants into professional staff. I think that our staff do quite well with making that transition, but it comes with the caveat of having much higher expectations, as Casey's mentioned before. But that may not be the case at your institution, that they may still see you as somebody who doesn't have that clearance of being in that position. And then, of course, keeping the respect of the previous graduate assistants. As Casey mentioned on the flip side, that he was a student, and then graduate assistants may still see him as a student, but making sure that he has made that transition. Somebody going from graduate assistant to assistant director has the adverse of, hey, I know we were friends, and I know that I've got this new position and I need to balance that. Which leads into when I became associate director, I have friends and relationships with people who are assistant directors here. We don't have coordinators, but I went ahead and put that in there. And so, learning how to balance that with what my job includes has been a struggle for me. It's still a struggle for me, but I like to focus on those relationships individually rather than as a collective. And so making those relationships stronger where they're weak has been my focus point for the past couple of years. And then establishing that superior subordinate status is really difficult because I have several people who are under my umbrella that have worked way longer than I have in the professional setting. And so being able to be their boss, but also take in their advice has been really critical to my success. And then, of course, changing your leadership style per employee. Unfortunately, nobody can be managed the same way. And that's a lesson that I had to learn quickly from being a graduate assistant, even that early on. But that has really worked well for me in my position right now.
So we're going to get into questions real quick, but before we do, I know we have some questions in the chat. About the social media, Region 4, if you haven't followed it, follow it. That's how I keep up to date. But we'll go to the questions. First, we'll start with the ones that were posted in the chat. Jeremy, I think this was in response to Lauren's story about you're glad your camera was off, your jaw dropped. My face, because I was at the other end of the conference table, was just like, just dying inside for Lauren. It was bad. And then also the guy that lost the position, or lost out to me in the position, he's a big, intimidating guy, and he was kind of like between us. So it was like looking at Lauren, like, you've made a terrible mistake. And looking at him like, please don't get pissed off. Like, keep calm. But I think everyone handled it pretty well. It was a good laugh, and it's a good joke to bring up every now and then. But,
yeah, great joke. It's not embarrassing at all.
So we'll go to Isaac. Are there current situations where you think it would be beneficial for a program to hire internally versus externally? I'll kind of start this off, and I'll give it over to you, Lauren. I would say in our position currently, with there not being a professional staff, both of our GAs for rec sports being internal hires was good. It kind of took a lot off of Lauren. She's trusted us with basically her entire job, minus, I believe, timesheets. But it's a good during that. It could be good in other instances as well. I know personally for me, I had some other personal reasons why I wanted to stay in this area. So as far as I go, it was beneficial for me. But there are, of course, pros and cons to both. Lauren, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add on to that.
No, just really piggybacking off of that. It was really critical in this time and place as well that I think we could have hired an external candidate and it would have been just as successful. But with having to manage COVID policies on top of planning for the entire school year and what that looks like for safety of our students, having our two current GAs, I mean, they have crushed it. So that has been really great having them be internal, but they're just great guys anyways. So that's been very nice. So just really piggybacking off of that. I think it depends on the institution and what they're looking for, that if there is another vacant position above a position, internal hire would be easier and just better for the institution as far as time and effort goes. Jeremy, your hires as an internal candidate, were they because the positions had been vacated or were positions created and promoted? Curious on thoughts of filling a vacant position versus moving into a new created position. We have actually had somebody move up into a created position. Several years ago, we had one associate director, and then we created another associate director, and somebody in our current organization moved up and vacated their position. And then we hired for that assistant director externally. And that's where the internal position actually happened too, where we grilled the guy. And so my position was vacated because our associate director at the time moved up. She's on the call today, Ashley, yes. So we have had several people move up and out, and then we've had to fill those positions. Does that answer your question, Jeremy?
Yes, it does. Yeah, I was just curious, and then maybe thoughts on, positioning for a promotion, when there's a new position and an internal candidate versus external candidates. I'm just, you answered the question for me. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, because our second associate director position was not created and interviewed for. It was created and immediately moved into that position. And then how do you handle references when you are internal, if your reference is on the hiring committee? I think that varies from a graduate assistant to assistant director or to associate director. But for my specific instance, when I had to apply, I did not list Galen as my reference. He was my immediate supervisor. No, I can't remember. But Casey, I think I had you go ahead and put me because I was your immediate supervisor as well. And then Ashley, I don't know if you have anything to say about that if you're still at your computer. But I asked Ashley about that, and I think I left Galen off because he was on the committee for the hiring. So I put Ashley as my current reference.
I am here, by the way, and yes, that is how it was set up.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm over here writing apology letters to all the candidates that you wrongly, in a very unprofessional way, told them they did a good job. So
It's sad.
I'm tuned out. I'm very busy.
You can just walk mine over.
And if I could just chime in there, is I've served on a number of hiring committees in this instance where we've had internals. I typically will recuse myself from the decision-making process. So I might sit in on the interviews and help with discussion, but when it comes down to making a decision, my vote does not count.
Interesting.
And I would kind of add on to this as far as references go as an internal hire. It was really a challenge of mine, and I kind of sensed it 5 years, my 4th year, where all of my references were here at Foster Recreation Center. I didn't have anything external. So really working with I had a professor of mine who really backed me up. I added him, getting an internship in a different recreation field. I did public recreation. I don't like public recreation, but I did it. But I had a good reference from there as well. So just kind of branching out and diversifying as an internal candidate was very beneficial for me, not only for references, but also experience and knowledge.
And I did have one more question for you guys that I'll pose. So maybe your goal is to stay at Missouri State forever. Maybe it is. But if you're looking to potentially move up and there's opportunities outside of Missouri State, how do you sell yourself to that new employer if the bulk of your experience is at Missouri State?
I can go ahead and start with it. Like I mentioned, the experience outside, that's the biggest thing that I've done. Also just professional development outside of Missouri State. So I believe if we're counting this as a conference, which I think we should, this would be my 5th conference that I've been to, which potentially could be more than some professional staff. So just trying to use the things that I've done as an undergraduate, the diverse experience that I've tried to obtain, trying to play that as a strength, as well as just saying, you know, I did this as a graduate assistant, but I also did this that a graduate assistant would do, but I wasn't a graduate assistant. So using experience that I gained that normally you would get as a graduate assistant or an assistant director, but I was a student or a graduate assistant. So really just trying to play off that strength area.
Yeah, and I will add on to a lot of those about, you know, just it's all in how you word things, and that's something that I really focus on in an interview is even though all of my experiences may come from one institution, or most of my experiences are going to come from Missouri State, our institution is really great about not pigeonholing you, and so being able to supervise multiple areas and even have the opportunity to take on different areas is something Ashley has set up for Galen and myself, that in a few years, if we get stagnant in our position, switching things up, I'll take over facilities, he'll take over rec sports. And so being able to be associate director of campus recreation and not associate director of facilities or associate director of programs is an opportunity that a lot of people don't get. And it will enable me to branch out if I am seeking a position elsewhere.
Thank you. Any other questions last minute? All right, well, guys, this is the last session of the conference. So again, I want to thank everybody for participating. This has been great. It's been a learning experience for all of us that have been involved with it. There is some talk that 2021 may have to be virtual as well. It kind of depends on what folks' budgets look like and travel situations. So we are evaluating that for early spring. And so we may be doing this again. So we'll be looking for feedback. I will send out a conference evaluation probably in an email tomorrow. So we will be looking for your feedback. And with that, I want to make sure that I post the session feedback before I forget. And we will put that in the chat. So please fill that out so your presenters can learn from you and go from there. So you guys have any parting words for the group?
Nope. If you guys have any questions ever, if you need anything, I will go ahead and put my email in the chat as well. If you ever had any questions, if I can type well enough, I'm on the spot, you know. So anybody can take that down and copy and paste it.
All right, gang. Well, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Again, thank you for participating in our Region 4 virtual conference.
Yeah,
We'll see
thanks,
ya.
Matt.